On the night of the 29th of November 1981, actress Natalie Wood vanished from her yacht off the coast of California. Hours later, her body was found floating face down in the cold water near Catalina Island. She was 43. The official story said it was an accident, a tragic fall from her boat after a night of drinking. But even then, nothing added up. There were bruises on her arms, scratches on her body, and conflicting testimonies from the three people who had been aboard that night. Her husband, actor Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the ship's captain. None of them agreed on what happened. None of them called for help until it was too late. And Hollywood, terrified of scandal, was quick to bury the truth. Natalie Wood had spent her entire life in front of cameras, adored by millions, starring in classics like Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendor in the Grass. But behind the perfect image was a woman haunted by fear, a childhood terror of dark water, a marriage built on jealousy, and a career that demanded her to smile through heartbreak. Her death was ruled accidental drowning, but the police reopened the case decades later, reclassifying it as suspicious. Her husband became a person of interest. Questions resurfaced, whispers returned. What really happened that night on the yacht? Was it love, rage, or simply fate? Everyone thought they knew Natalie Wood's story, but the truth behind her final night remains Hollywood's most haunting mystery. To understand the mystery of Natalie Wood, you first have to understand the world that built her. A Hollywood that glittered with fame on the surface, but thrived on control, manipulation, and fear beneath it. Natalie wasn't born into glamour, she was crafted into it. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko in 1938 to Russian immigrant parents, she grew up in a small California town with a mother who believed stardom was destiny. By the age of 5, Natalie was acting. By 8, she was a star. Her mother would whisper to her before takes, "Do it for the camera, cry for them," and she did perfectly. She became the studio system's dream, dark-eyed, expressive, capable of breaking hearts with a single look. But her childhood was a performance. Her mother was obsessed, controlling every part of her life, from her wardrobe to her thoughts. When Natalie was frightened, she was told fear was weakness. When she hesitated, she was reminded that perfection was the only way to survive in Hollywood. By her teenage years, she was no longer just a child star. She was a symbol of the new American youth. Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, made her a cultural icon. Opposite James Dean, she embodied the pain of a generation, and off-screen, she lived it. Dean's death shortly after the film shook her deeply, leaving her convinced that tragedy followed her wherever she went. Her transition into adulthood was rare. Few child stars survived it. Natalie did, but at a price. She became one of the most photographed women in America, every relationship dissected, every flaw magnified. Beneath the fame, she battled anxiety, nightmares, and a recurring fear of drowning. She once confessed in an interview, "I've always been afraid of dark water. I don't know why." Her mother later revealed that a fortune teller had told her Natalie would die in dark water. In 1957, she married Robert Wagner, one of Hollywood's most handsome and promising young actors. Together, they were a golden couple, perfect smiles, perfect headlines. But perfection hides cracks. Their marriage was filled with jealousy and insecurity. Wagner was older, protective, sometimes controlling. Natalie, fragile yet fiery, craved both love and independence. Their first marriage ended in 1962 amid rumors of infidelity and emotional distance. Yet, despite a decade apart and other marriages in between, they found their way back to each other in 1972. Friends said it was as if they couldn't live without or with one another. By the late 1970s, Natalie had stepped back from acting to focus on family. She had 2 daughters, Natasha and Courtney, and was preparing for a comeback with Brainstorm, co-starring Christopher Walken, a role that would mark her final performance. On the set, she was radiant but restless. Those close to her noticed a tension, both in her marriage and in her friendship with Walken. Robert Wagner reportedly grew jealous, convinced that his wife's closeness with her co-star was more than professional. The gossip columns began to whisper. And then came that Thanksgiving weekend, a yacht, 3 actors, too much wine, and one of Hollywood's most beautiful women lost to the sea she had feared all her life. The stage was set for a tragedy that would outlive everyone aboard. By the time she turned 40, Natalie Wood had lived 3 different lives. She was the child star America adored, the teenage rebel who burned with emotion, and the graceful leading lady who could hold her own beside Hollywood's most powerful men. But beneath the elegance, her life was a maze of contradictions. A woman adored by millions but never truly safe, loved but never secure. Her comeback in Brainstorm was meant to be a renewal, a return to the craft she had mastered since childhood. Yet behind the scenes, her marriage to Robert Wagner was unraveling again. The tabloids had long painted them as Hollywood's golden couple, but friends saw the tension simmering beneath. Wagner was intensely protective, even possessive. Natalie, meanwhile, had become close to her co-star Christopher Walken, whose mysterious charm fascinated her. Walken admired her talent, Natalie admired his focus. It was an emotional connection that didn't have to be romantic to be threatening. Thanksgiving weekend, 1981. Natalie and Wagner invited Walken to spend a few days on their yacht, the Splendor. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, just 3 actors and the ship's captain, Dennis Davern. The weather was cool, the sea calm, and the wine plentiful. They anchored near Catalina Island, where Natalie had spent time as a child. But to those who were there, the trip quickly shifted from relaxation to tension. On the evening of November 28th, the four dined at a local restaurant. Witnesses later said they were laughing at first until the drinks began to flow. Arguments broke out. Wagner appeared irritated, particularly at the attention between Natalie and Walken. When the group returned to the yacht, the atmosphere was tense, brittle, charged with unspoken resentment. Captain Davern later described hearing a heated argument, below deck voices raised, objects breaking, then silence. Minutes later, Wagner emerged, looking agitated. Natalie was gone. At 1:30 a.m., the Coast Guard received a call, a woman missing from the Splendor. By dawn, searchlights cut across the black water. They found her hours later, floating near the shore, wearing only a flannel nightgown, socks, and a down jacket. The small inflatable dinghy, the Valiant, was discovered nearby, its engine off, oars inside. The official explanation was simple. Natalie had tried to secure the dinghy, slipped, and drowned. But those who knew her refused to believe it. She was terrified of dark water. She never left the boat alone, not at night, not in cold weather. And the bruises on her arms and legs, later described as consistent with an assault or struggle, only deepened the mystery. In the days that followed, Hollywood fell silent. The media printed the official story an accident and moved on. Robert Wagner issued a short, controlled statement. "The world has lost a remarkable woman. I have lost my beloved wife." Christopher Walken disappeared from the public eye, refusing interviews. Captain Davern, meanwhile, began to drink heavily and tell conflicting stories about what he'd seen that night. Natalie's funeral was a star-studded tragedy. Elizabeth Taylor, Frank Sinatra, Gene Kelly, all standing in stunned silence. She was buried in a white dress, her face serene, as if the years of anxiety had finally lifted. But for those who knew her, the child who'd been told her fate lay in dark water, the image was unbearable. The woman who'd conquered Hollywood had died in the one place she feared most. And for 40 years, the truth of what happened on that yacht has remained one of Hollywood's most whispered secrets. The official story of Natalie Wood's death was clean and simple, too simple. Accidental drowning. That phrase followed her for decades, printed in black ink, sealing her story with a full stop that never felt right. But those who were closest to her, and those who were there that night, couldn't live with that version of events. The cracks in the story began to show, and beneath them lay something far more unsettling. In the years after her death, Captain Dennis Davern changed his account multiple times. At first, he echoed Wagner's version. Natalie had gone to bed after an argument, and when Wagner noticed she was missing, they searched for her. But in later interviews, his voice trembled as he confessed, "I lied to protect them." He claimed that the argument between Natalie and Wagner that night had been violent, that objects were smashed, voices were screaming, and Wagner was drunk and enraged. "They argued about Walken," he said. "It was jealousy. Then there was silence." Davern also claimed Wagner delayed calling the Coast Guard for hours, saying he didn't want the story out. When asked directly if he believed Wagner was responsible, Davern's answer was chillingly simple. Yes. In 2011, 30 years after Natalie's death, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case. New witnesses had come forward, and forensic experts re-examined the autopsy. The bruises on her body were consistent with a struggle, not an accidental fall. The coroner changed the cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning in other undetermined factors. Wagner, by then in his 80s, refused to comment publicly. He was later named a person of interest. Christopher Walken, after decades of silence, finally gave one brief statement. The truth is, nobody knows what happened. It was an accident, terrible, tragic, but that's all. And yet, his tone hollow, rehearsed, left more questions than answers. Natalie's sister, Lana Wood, has never stopped fighting. In interviews and her 2021 memoir, she insisted her sister's death was no accident. Natalie was terrified of water, she wrote. She would never, ever have gone out there alone. Something happened on that boat. The reopened investigation reignited old Hollywood whispers. Some insiders claimed Wagner had a history of jealousy, that Natalie had been planning to leave him for good. Others pointed to the power structures of the industry, that protecting a famous leading man mattered more than justice for a woman, even one as beloved as Natalie Wood. There's another layer to the tragedy, one less visible but just as cruel. From the moment Natalie's body was pulled from the water, her story was no longer hers. It belonged to studios, to journalists, to gossip columns that turned her death into myth. The terrified girl from Russian immigrant roots had spent her life trying to control her image. In death, she lost that battle completely. To this day, the case remains open but unsolved. No charges, no confessions, just silence, the same silence that filled the dark ocean the night she disappeared. And so the question endures. What really happened aboard the Splendor? Was it rage, fear, or a tragic accident? The truth drowned with her somewhere between the waves and the lies that followed. From this channel's perspective, the story of Natalie Wood isn't just a mystery. It's a mirror reflecting Hollywood's deepest flaw, its obsession with perfection and its silence in the face of tragedy. Natalie's death was not simply about one night on a yacht. It was the final chapter in a lifetime of control, manipulation, and image-making that began when she was a child. She was raised in a system where emotions were currency and fear was discipline. From her first audition, her tears were rehearsed, her smiles timed, her voice trained to please others. By the time she was an adult, she didn't belong to herself anymore. She belonged to an industry that loved her beauty, her fragility, and her tragedy, but not her truth. Hollywood built Natalie Wood, and when she died, it protected itself. The studios, the tabloids, even her peers had too much to lose. A scandal involving an A-list husband, another star, and alcohol on a luxury yacht, it was the kind of story that could ruin reputations and careers. So the narrative became simple. Accident. No more questions, no more headlines, just a legend frozen in time. But legends aren't born from silence. They're born from the parts of truth that refuse to stay buried. Natalie's sister, Lana, has spent decades fighting that silence, not out of vengeance, but out of love. She was my sister, Lana once said, and I won't let her be remembered as a mystery. She was a person, and that's what makes this story so haunting. Natalie Wood wasn't just a Hollywood starlet who met a tragic end. She was a woman trying to break free from the cage of her own image, a woman who wanted to age, to act, to live beyond the roles she was given. But the world around her only saw Natalie Wood, the icon. And icons aren't allowed to change. Her death forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many stories like hers have been buried under the glitter of Hollywood? How many women have disappeared not into the ocean, but into silence, because telling the truth was too inconvenient? Maybe Robert Wagner will take his secrets to the grave. Maybe Christopher Walken truly doesn't know. Maybe we'll never have a confession. But what remains undeniable is this. Natalie's death was not treated with the same urgency, respect, or justice that any ordinary woman deserves. This channel believes Natalie Wood's story is not about conspiracy. It's about the system that allowed her to vanish and then moved on. It's about the price of beauty, the danger of silence, and the way Hollywood builds its angels only to let them fall. So what do you think? Was it an accident or a cover-up? Did Natalie Wood simply slip into the sea, or was she pushed by something much larger? Jealousy, power, or the machinery of an image too perfect to break? The answers may never surface, but the questions refuse to sink. There's an old photo of Natalie Wood, taken sometime in the early 1960 seconds. She's standing by the ocean, the wind in her hair, smiling just slightly, that delicate, wistful half-smile that made the world fall in love with her. The sea glitters behind her, calm, endless, indifferent. Looking at it now, it feels almost prophetic. Natalie once said, "The only time I feel alive is when I'm acting." Maybe that's why her performances still shimmer with something no camera can fully capture, a kind of aching sincerity. Watch her in West Side Story or in Splendor in the Grass, and you see it. The vulnerability of someone who lived her roles, because real life never gave her the safety to feel. Every close-up feels like a confession, every tear too honest to fake. Her death became one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries, but her life, her presence, is what lingers. She was one of the rare stars who bridged the golden age and the modern era, who made vulnerability powerful and grace rebellious. Even now, her films don't feel old. They feel alive, like she's still speaking through them, asking to be remembered for her art, not for the water that took her. In a way, Natalie never really left the sea that frightened her. She became part of its myth, immortal, elusive, forever drifting between beauty and sorrow. The child forced to cry on cue, the woman trapped by her image, the icon lost to the waves, all of them are Natalie. Maybe that's what makes her story timeless. Because every time we watch her, we're reminded that fame can immortalize you, but it can also erase you. And that behind every perfect Hollywood smile, there's a heartbeat trying not to drown. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, you know,